What is up, guys? Rickackis here, and this is a guide on constructing your first deck in Magic Duels Origins. Now, this guide is mainly centered around beginners, however, there is some useful information in here that even returning players will appreciate. Now, without further ado, let's get started. Now, what exactly does your deck consist of? Well, your deck is made from 60 cards of both lands and non-lands, aka spells. A spell is basically anything non-land, so creature, enchantment, instant, or sorcery, those are all spells. Now, how many lands should you run in your deck? Well, for an average deck, the general consensus is to run 40% of the cards in your 60 card deck to be lands. Now that works out to 24 lands in your 60 card deck. The rule of thumb is that for every 2 cards you add beyond 60, add 1 additional land. It is, however, thought that going above 60 cards is a negative thing. You want to run the lowest number of cards possible, aka 60, because those are the cards that are going to synergize with each other the best. I know if you're a new player, you're going to have a hard time cutting some of your cards because they look good on paper. But after playing with your deck in single player, I would recommend at first, I think you'll begin to see that certain cards, when you draw them, they're simply disappointing and they have very narrow places where they're actually good. In those cases, cut those cards and try to get your deck down to 60. Now you may be wondering, what colors do I use in my deck? Well, there's 5 extremely distinct colors as well as some artifact cards. Artifact cards are simply cards that don't belong to a specific color and have no color in their casting cost, so you can put them in any deck. The 5 different colors are blue, red, green, black, and white. Blue centers around control and trickery. It has a lot of stuff that messes with your opponent's game plan. For example, bouncing their creature card back into their hand can really screw them over, as they're probably going to have to waste their next turn playing that creature again. Blue also has counter spells, letting their extremely powerful play be completely countered before it ever hits the battlefield. Red focuses on speed and aggression. It has a lot of powerful, low-costing cards as well as direct damage cards. If you're playing another color and you get an opponent down to 2 life, there's nothing you can do about it, but for red, you can simply draw a card that deals damage directly to your opponent. Green has a focus on powerful creatures and ramping to them early, which is to put lands onto the battlefield sooner than you would so that you can play your powerful creatures even earlier than you should be. Black centers on death and power at any cost. Black has a lot of spells that can kill your opponent's creatures and also can draw you cards, but at the expense of your own life. White focuses on the collective good, having a lot of powerful, low-costing creatures and then spells that pump your entire team to get through with massive chunks of damage. White can also tap and make your opponent's creatures not attack. Now, when building your first deck, I would recommend playing 2 colors. That's because you simply don't have enough cards unlocked in any one color to build a competitive deck from it. Playing 2 colors lets you play the best spells from 2 different colors. It also lets you play powerful multicolored cards like Zendikar Incarnate. Now, this is a 4/4 on turn 4 and is often attacking as a 5/4 if you play a land on turn 5. That's a very powerful creature. Now, your deck is also going to break down into one of 3 main deck archetypes. These 3 types are aggro, mid-range, and control. Now, although 24 is the average number of lands you want in your deck, aggro decks sometimes want less lands, going down to 23, 22, or below, and control decks often want more lands, going up to 25 or 26. Aggro decks are focused on winning the game fast. They often play very low-costing, powerful creatures to get the jump on your opponent. Now, truthfully, any color can be utilized in an aggro deck, but most commonly you see red and white. Now, a great example of an aggro card is Council's Lieutenant. It is a 2/1 with first strike for 2 white mana. Now, because it has first strike and it's generally low costing, you can play it on turn 2, it's probably going to either kill off your opponent's creatures that they're trying to block with, or get through your opponent's defenses, in which case its Renown 1 will trigger. It will become a 3/2 with first strike. Oh, and by the way, from that point on, when it attacks, it'll pump your entire team with +1/+1. A very aggro-related card that rewards you for attacking and keeping the pressure up on your opponent. The advantage of aggro decks is that they come out of the gate swinging and absolutely punish your opponent if they're playing a deck that is too slow, or if they stumble. If your opponent misses a land drop, you will absolutely decimate them with an aggro deck. The downside of aggro decks is that they can run out of steam. Playing a Council's Lieutenant on turn 4 when your opponent has a Zendikar Incarnate is pretty sad. Now let's move on to mid-range decks. Mid-range decks are also described as best card decks. They simply have an allotment of colors and play the best cards from those colors. An example of a great mid-range card is Outland Colossus. This is a 6/6 for 5 mana with Renown 6, so if it deals damage to your opponent, it becomes an enormous 12/12. Also, it can't be blocked by more than one creature, so it's likely your opponent's creatures will die as blocking it, because 6/6 for 5 is very uncommon. Now, the thing about mid-range decks is that Outland Colossus, compared to pretty much any individual card in an aggro deck, is going to be better. Outland Colossus is probably individually more powerful than what any aggro deck is doing. The problem is you have to get to turn 5 to play it. As such, aggro decks will often run a lot of early game removal like Reeve Soul in order to take care of your opponent's early plays. A card like Elvish Visionary is also a great card in a mid-range deck. It comes out early, draws a card so it replaces itself and lets you dig more into your deck, finding those big powerful cards, and also presents a 1/1 body able to trade off for an opponent's creature or at least block a powerful attack for a turn. The advantage of a mid-range deck is that it's often playing a lot of extremely powerful cards, and if these cards go unanswered, it will quickly win the game. The downside of mid-range decks is that they're doing a lot of things, and if they stumble on one of those things, they can falter. For example, if you don't have enough removal for your opponent's early game creatures, you can lose. If you have all removal and then no payoff cards, you can lose. There often needs to be a lot of different things going on for a mid-range deck to succeed. However, mid-range decks are by far the safest choice for designing your first deck. Now lastly, we have the control deck archetype, which is there to, you guessed it, control the game. Control decks often have a lot of removal to deal with your opponent's creatures. Also, mass removal like Languish. Languish is a great control card. And then they have extremely expensive payoff cards, such as Alhammaret High Arbiter. Now again, the general game plan of a control deck is to answer all of your opponent's threats until they simply run out of gas, have nothing to do, and then you play your extremely powerful late game threat and often just win the game at that point. Control decks also have to run cards that let them draw extra cards in order to keep up with what their opponents are doing and continue to find answers to their opponent's threats. Control decks are often known for running blue to utilize counter spells, but don't necessarily have to. Now I do want to give a shout out to a fourth-ish style of deck, which is Ramp. Now Ramp is always going to be green based, and it's going to let you play cards in green that let you put lands onto the battlefield earlier than you should, and also has creatures that they themselves can tap for mana. All of this mana is going to let you play big powerful creatures, often found in green, earlier than you should, and this is a powerful strategy. Now the last thing I want to talk to you guys about is have synergy between the cards within your deck. Now one of the most obvious synergies within Magic Origins is the Elf deck. Having cards like Shaman of the Pack, which is an extremely powerful card letting you deal damage equal to the number of elves you control, and then if you just play a lot of elves, obviously that's going to be very, very powerful. There's even more cards that work together with this elf strategy. But synergies don't always need to be this obvious. Another great synergy is the combination of Foundry Street Denizen with Dragon Fodder. In an aggro deck, Foundry Street Denizen turn 1 and then Dragon Fodder turn 2 will put 2 creature tokens onto the battlefield and let Foundry Street Denizen attack for 3 power on turn 2, which is excellent in an aggro deck. Both of these cards by themselves aren't terrible either, so they don't necessarily require themselves to work, but they work very well together. Small synergies like this are really going to help you in constructing a deck. Now I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, don't be afraid to click subscribe for more Origins content. I actually am going to start a weekly series where I take a different deck every week and battle it out online. Again, I hope you guys enjoyed, and as always, have a good day.